All right, well, welcome back, everybody. As we promised in one of our last videos, I have Kirk Zeller with me again, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth with the collaborative exhibition that we have here with his cars on display. So, Kirk, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into collecting cars initially?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, since I was young, I've always been into cars. I restored a couple of cars in high school and when I was younger, so it's always been something I was interested in. I got busy with life, busy with career and advanced degrees and things. And so when I finished up my degree my master's degree in the UK and was moving back to the States, I was looking for a car. I kind of had an idea in my mind of what I was looking for. I'd always loved Italian cars and the design of Italian cars, but knew I probably didn't have the budget to keep, to buy a Ferrari and keep it going and a daily driver. So I was looking for something that kind of, had the Italian styling, but maybe a little bit more, daily driver type reliability.
Yeah.
And just completely serendipitously, I came across the Bertone designed and manufactured Volvo 780, which the particular one that I found had a Volvo engine, at the same transmission as other Volvos, so it had that sort of Swedish reliability and utility, if you will, combined with very, very sleek Italian styling, and fell in love with it immediately. Still my all-time favorite car. I've driven that one. It's got almost 300,000 miles on it. Wow. Just recently did an engine transplant and getting ready to restore it. So that was kind of the genesis, if you will, of developing the interest in Bertone cars. And I started buying a couple more of them. Bought a wrecked one because one of the things of collecting these limited edition cars that you find is you can't get parts. So the best way to get them, if you can find a wrecked one and just literally take it apart piece by piece and label it and put it on the shelf, is a great way to stockpile parts. And I just really loved the concept, of Bertone and started looking into some of the other cars, and gradually over time have expanded my collection to, well over 10 Bertone related cars. And then I have some other interests in car collaborations, which include cars that were designed through joint development between Volkswagen and Porsche, and ones between Land Rover and another company, and then the ones that Maserati, some cars that Maserati designed that were sold by Chrysler. So I've always been really attracted to, for the car, it was really love at first sight.
Right.
And like a lot of things, you fall in love with something, and then later you can explain why. In the beginning, you just know you love it. And I think part of what's drawn me to the Bertone design cars is that sense of collaboration. And what can come out of collaboration between multiple companies or multiple countries, and it's a big part of my professional life, collaboration, particularly between the United States and Japan. I think somehow it all kind of rolled into this desire to collect cars that are made through collaborations between two or more companies. Yeah, because you really see the kind of you get the very really cutting edge, exotic Italian design with the kind of utility of a Swedish-made car, and something about that really appeals to me. So.
Well, when you can get the best of both worlds, it's
absolutely.
It's really a great thing to come across. And you mentioned collaboration in just your personal life with work, and I think now as much as any time it's relevant, and people need to be realizing the importance of collaborativeness and the ability to work alongside one another, during this pandemic we're experiencing, and that has kind of driven us to where we're at today.
I guess so, yeah.
Coming together and kind of doing these videos to put some more information out there for people who are maybe helmed up at home, and you talk about collaborativeness with cars and how tough it can be to find those parts. And so even if you can find them broken down and about to go through the wrecker, if you can salvage as much of those things, and I think a lot of car guys out there have experienced a lot of the same thing, whether it's an American made, Japanese made, European model of any kind, where people get to be like that a little bit. So it reminds me of a story. One of our good friends at the museum, Bertone, when I started to research this company, when we began talking about this display, was really a progressive company, and right before this exhibition, we did a Studebaker exhibition, which was always deemed a very progressive,
Very ahead of their
American,
time, yeah.
you know, ahead of their time type of company. And we have a very good friend of the collection that saved a beautiful Studebaker from the pick and pull lot just south of Kearney from Anderson Wrecking, and thankfully it hadn't been scavenged too terribly bad, and was able to find the original build sheet to the car. So shout out to George Krem. What an amazing job he did in getting that car to a friend to restore and help through that process. So, you know, kind of car collecting in general, the whole atmosphere of it is really centered around collaboration, you know, where you have maybe one person doing an interior and another person doing your engine, and you're doing your body work, or, you know, any kind of mixture of any of that. So it's really kind of interesting. So now let's dive a little bit into this first car that you fell in love with. Was, if I'm not mistaken, actually the 91 the coupe, right? The 780
so
coupe.
The one that I initially fell in love with was actually a 1990. So these cars were designed in the 1980s by Bertone for Volvo. And then they were featured, I think it was in the 85 or 86 car show in Switzerland. Both Volvo and Bertone exhibited the car. And then the U.S. first production, first model year to come to the U.S. was the 1987. They did 87 through 91, and they started with a French engine. I believe it's the same engine that's in the DeLorean. You know, it's got good torque. I've got a couple of the cars with that engine in it, but of course, in the U.S., it's not always easy to find mechanics who work on a French engine. So when I first bought the 1990 and said I have a Volvo 780, like, we don't work on those. Like, just wait a second. It's actually the one with the Volvo engine in it. Oh, well, no problem. Bring it in. You know, we're happy to work on it. So, you know, and what I started with was that one, and fell in love with those cars. And the one we have here in the museum is actually the 1991. And the important distinction there is that the 1991 was rebranded as the Volvo Coupe. And a little over 500 units were made, and 200 and some came to the U.S. One we have here in the museum is the mintest one I could possibly find after many, many years of searching. Sure. Still feels and drives like a new car. But there's something about these cars that I just really, really, really love, and I've ended up collecting every model year of that collaboration between Volvo and Bertone. Yeah.
Well, a couple of design, you know, features too, because we have two different Bertone style Volvos. One of the design features that I think is really kind of unique to Bertone is having the gas release and like hood release in the door jam. As you open your driver's door, it's in that door jam versus like down at the bottom or underneath the dash. So it makes it kind of a really unique placement of it. I think it's very, you know, efficient, you know, placement of it. And the other thing I will point out for those that come in, the blue 91 coupe, one of the features that I like to point out to people is the fact that it has defrosting side mirrors and heated front seats, which in the late 80s, early 90s, I mean, that was like, I would have to assume brand new technology. I haven't researched it, but I can't imagine it was in very many vehicles at that point in time. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of things that they did that was definitely ahead of the time, and these, you know, the Volvo 780/Coupe series. The back seats are phenomenal. I had the car for many years until somebody else was driving, and actually had the opportunity to sit in the back seat. But the seats that they put in these are this amazing Italian leather, very contoured, very luxurious seats. I mean, they put so much thought into the design of every one of the Bertone cars. But yeah, there's definitely some you know, themes that you'll see in almost any car designed by Bertone, and that is, you know, the release for the trunk and the gas being in the door jamb, which is really convenient. The other thing is you'll on almost all the Bertone design cars, they'll usually be dual branded. So I mean, Bertone has one of which we have in the museum that are actually Bertone branded, you know, Bertone cars, but most of them are dual branded with whoever the, you know, that commissioned it, and then Bertone, and usually you'll find that logo is going to be on the C pillar, or it's going to be between the front door and the wheel well.
Right.
And you'll see it in the car behind us. On any of the cars here in the museum that are Bertone designed, you'll see that Bertone B. And again, the logo this is a logo that you'll see. This is any of the Bertone branded cars. You'll see this B on it, and the ones that are actually, the legal manufacturer is Bertone and are actually sold as Bertone automobiles will generally have this whole logo that you see here. And there's a few of those out there. Probably the one that's most known is the Bertone X19, which had a pretty significant production volume, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit.
Well, so while we're on the Volvos, let's jump over to the 1980 262C that we have in the museum. Even though they're both Volvos, they do have quite a bit different look to them.
Yep.
And this one has some interesting history. It was actually originally owned by Matt Dillon, right?
That's correct, yep.
So that's always kind of a cool thing to have a car owned by, someone like Matt Dillon.
Well, actually, it's not that Matt Dillon. It's a different Matt Dillon,
All
but
right,
Matt
okay,
Dillon nonetheless.
okay.
Matt Dillon. This Matt Dillon is famous in his own right in the Volvo world. Somebody whose family is involved with Volvo cars, repairing them and restoring them for I think generations. This was one that he personally had in his collection. And after he passed away, it was sold, and I eventually got a hold of it. It's a really interesting one. It's a resto mod, and they did a phenomenal. Revolve Store did a phenomenal job at the resto mod, and this is one of the ones that would have come out with the French engine. Again, always tricky to get worked on in parts here in the U.S. So what they did is they pulled that out and they put in a Ford 302. So I love having it out at car shows and stuff and firing it up, and people look because it doesn't sound at all like people are expecting a Volvo to sound. So, and then they did some really unique features in terms of the way that the paint scheme that they use, the color choices. It definitely is a attention-grabbing car when it's out and about on the road.
Yeah, the black and gold, and I would say one of the most notable differences between the two Volvos, obviously they're different models and standalone, but one of the things, whenever I stand next to the 91 Coupe, I'm always having to remind myself that it is a two-door coupe, not a four-door sedan, because the rear window for the back seat is big enough, and it feels when you're standing next to it like it should be a four-door sedan, versus the 1982 62C, especially with that black and gold color scheme and a little bit narrower stance. The back window is not as proportioned that way to give it that four-door sedan feel. Although the back seat looks like it would be in a four-door sedan.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, and I've had quite a few guests who have been out to see the exhibit already, and I myself had thought this when I first saw it, was from the front of the vehicle. And we have them parallel parked, but from the front of it, it really reminds a lot of us of an early 80s Buick Grand National. And just kind of going back into that car styling aspect of where people are seeing what other companies are doing and kind of pulling some of those design features into their builds, whether that happened with the Buick Grand National or not. It is uncanny how similar the front ends do look. So that's kind of a really cool feature there with that car. Now, you mentioned when we were talking about the badging, we do have one Bertone branded car, most notably the X19. It was originally a collaboration between Fiat and Bertone through the 70s. And one of the neat things I found in researching that car was that they, kind of like a Jeep Wrangler, has different series, the Black Ops series, all the military series you see now, the Rubicon and Sahara and those things. In the 70s, they were really, Bertone was playing around with that with the Fiat X19, where they were offering a lot of these different, performance and body styling, interior type of trim packages under different names. But it's really a sporty little car.
It is.
And as you look at it, if it looks familiar, really Pontiac stole the entire design, I hate to break it to you, for the Pontiac Fiero. So it will look familiar to you when you come in, but really it's an interesting car. Tell us a little bit more about the X19, what kind of made it special both for you and you think as one of their largest production vehicles.
Yeah, and I think that is part of it. It is definitely one of the largest production vehicles designed by Bertone. The X19 they produced about 180,000 units or so. And it's one of the most recognizable, I think, if you were to see all the Bertone designs, the ones that it's probably the one that you've seen on the road the most out of any of the Bertone designs. I mean, there's some that you'll see in posters more, the Lamborghini Countach and Lamborghini Miura and many of the Ferrari designs and things you will have seen in posters more, but the one that is most relatable to people, and all of them have that Bertone logo on there. Yep. And that car was made through the 1970s. And again, it's one ahead of its time. I mean, it was designed in the late 60s, rolled into production around 70 or so, and until the mid 80s, it was actually marketed as, it was designed and manufactured by Bertone, but marketed by Fiat through Fiat dealers. And then in the mid 80s, Fiat moved on with focusing on a different design, and it was continued on by Bertone, fully Bertone branded and badged. With Bertone as a legal manufacturer, and then sold around the world. There were Bertone dealers here in the United States. Again, it's not an automaker many people are familiar with, but
Sure.
There were Bertone dealers here in the United States. And this one was ordered through a Bertone dealer in the United States. The one here in the museum, there were two cars like this with this exact package made. One of them burned up in a fire, unfortunately, and this is, as I understand it, the last one remaining with this very specific package. It's got a Corsica package with Saratoga completely see-through top. It really looks like a miniature supercar.
It really does, and it is a mid-engine, which
Yep.
Bertone did a lot of mid-engine works, start going all the way back to the 60s.
Yep.
And that I think that you talk about the Saratoga top. It's really intriguing because it's this kind of smoke gray top, and by far of the cars that we've brought in from your collection, I would have to say that X19 is probably my most favorite. Just for the simple fact that I think it's got such neat lines to it, the coloring, the whole package of the interior and everything. But it for me, being a kid that grew up in the 80s and was going off to college during the whole Fast and the Furious phase, I really feel like that car could be dropped right into Fast and the Furious 1.
Oh, absolutely.
And would not look out of place at all. It looked like it could really take down some of those, Japanese tuner cars and stuff that were big in those movies. And really just a really neat car, really intriguing. And I want to point out, Kirk mentioned that, talking of upwards of 179,000, total manufactured between the 70s and the 80s, both under the Fiat and the Bertone branding. That's still a really low production number. I mean,
compared to
most other manufacturers.
Tauruses and things where they make $1 million plus.
Well, yeah, it's just even other makes that were coming on strong, the Accords and Civics and Volkswagen Golfs and things like that of those eras. It was really still a rather low production car, and really we would equate that to Bentleys and things like that of today's era, not quite to the extent of like a Koenigsegg or something like that in the supercar world, but really low production, very customized styling, even though they were doing these kind of marketing ploys of different body kits and color schemes and interior packages to attract new and different buyers and different segments of the market. It was really just an interesting way, and it did receive a lot of attention. I've had folks come through that have said, man, I used to race these back in the 70s. Gosh, they were such great cars to run around in, and they were so fast and so much torque for how small and light they were. And that plays a lot into it. I think that's part of the reason you see cars like a Mazda Miata, why they're so popular. They're just light and airy and fun, and because of that, they give this feel of doing 140 when you're doing 60. And so that's kind of a really interesting car. Like I said, it's one of my favorite of the cars as part of the exhibition. Before we jump into the one behind us, because I think it's going to be the most eye-catching for folks, you did mention that you also fell in love with the Maserati TCs.
Yep.
The collaboration between Chrysler and Maserati.
Yep.
And that car even has some, as a collaboration between those two companies, has some nods to like a 55 T-Bird.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
So let's talk about that car a little bit.
Yeah, so it's an interesting design. I mean, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, I think, about the car, that it was a knockoff of the Chrysler Baron. In fact, it is the opposite.
Right.
So the Maserati TC was designed and manufactured, by Maserati and marketed by Chrysler. It's what became that design ultimately became the Chrysler LeBaron. So it's not a coincidence that they look very similar, because it is the foundation for those. The difference is there's a number of differences, but from a high level, you notice that they're a removable hardtop and a soft top, so they come with both.
Right.
And the hardtop does kind of have a little bit of a reminiscence of the old T-Birds with the porthole window, and with the Maserati logo right there in the porthole window. And it's a fun one to drive. It is truly a two-seater. There is literally no back seat, because you've got this the soft top that's always in there as well. Sure. But it's definitely one that, as I drive it around, it gets a lot of interest and attention.
Yeah, and you have several of those, I know.
Yes,
that
I do,
you,
yep.
Have as daily drivers because you enjoy them so much.
Yep.
The one here in the museum is probably your most mint. I think you said it had
absolutely.
30,000
Yep.
miles on it. And the cool thing, again, in preparing for this, because Kirk and I have been talking about this exhibition since summer of last year,
yeah.
April of last year, maybe even.
Yeah, about almost a year.
Yeah, Kirk came out in his 1980 Volvo, the 262C series, and we kind of first began the conversation there. But the interesting thing is we watch a lot of and get a lot of emails from Haggerty and Hemmings and some of the different, Mecum and stuff like that, keeping us kind of up to date with what's happening in the automotive collector world. And I've been impressed in probably the last 4 or 5 months. I've read probably about 4 or 5 different articles talking about the Maserati TC and how it should be on people's watch list.
Absolutely.
If you can find one, to pick one up, because much like a Mazda Miata, they're getting a lot of praise right now for the uniqueness of them and just kind of the fun and that free spiritedness that you get when you drive it. And so, it's very much a car that if somebody's looking to get something that is considered a collectible item, that is rare, that is, it may look like a late 80s LeBaron, but it really is a unique vehicle. Watch for those, because they are
Absolutely.
really neat little vehicles, and as Kirk can attest, a lot of fun to drive.
They are. And there's only a couple thousand units made, I believe. I mean, the production volumes are in the single-digit thousands. So this isn't a high production car, and it's right now it's kind of at the lowest that I've seen it. So I picked up 3 in the last couple years, partially because there was kind of a dip in the market. But
Sure.
I and a lot of other people do believe that this is one that you hold on to it for a few years, it's probably going to take off. I mean, there's no guarantee, but I've seen a huge appreciation of some of the other cars, particularly the Porsche 914. That's really taken off a lot in the last few years, and I think this is one that when the timing's right, because Maserati has a lot of interest in the U.S. right now. They've been doing really well in the last decade or so, the name has a lot more recognition than it used to, and as people want to go back and try to look at some of the earlier designs and some of the rarer designs, it's certainly one that I think people will start to take a look at and give some attention to.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that we talk a lot about, especially with our younger visitors, the elementary school kids, when they come through the museum, we're always giving them as staff members here and volunteers little things to keep an eye out for us or walking around a museum. And one of the things that a lot of us like to point out is for kids to look at the different badging on cars. And so we've been talking a lot about the Bertone badging and what it looks like and where to find it, which is it's in the normal, spots, right, where you would find that kind of on the front fender, below the wheel, just between the wheel well and the door. That C-pillar, the front grille, obviously the rear end of the vehicle. But the kind kind of the neat thing is with this exhibition is that you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, because you're getting 2-for-1s on all of them, where you're getting some of those unique Bertone badges, as well as the Volvo or the Alfa Romeo or the Maserati. Chrysler, which is really, I've read articles where people kind of deem it this bastardized branding logo, because it takes that very iconic trident of the Maserati and places it inside of that very iconic Chrysler Pentagon shape, and so it really does give people kind of pause for concern.
I find it charming, but
I think it's a really interesting way. Where you didn't see Bertone doing that with Volvo or with Alfa Romeo, where they were trying to mash up their brands. And I almost appreciate the separativeness of it, to really show, like, hey, this is an Alfa Romeo, and this is how we at Bertone have envisioned this car, or this styling for a Volvo, and really showcasing that these are two very separate entities coming together, working together and trying to match, gel into one thing. And so, while still putting their own stamp on it, and I appreciate that about the, those, but it is really fun to come in and look at the different branding on the cars. That's just one of the items we really point out. So I mentioned Alfa Romeo a couple of their times. So let's talk about the car right behind us. Definitely the most eye-catching.
Absolutely.
Whenever you throw a gull-wing door or a door that opens upward on a vehicle, everybody's going to stop to look at that, even if it is a DeLorean. So the car behind us, we kind of touched on, it is an Alfa Romeo Carrabbo replica. Due to there only having been one fully functioning prototype built for Alfa Romeo, and unfortunately they ultimately decided not to go into production with this vehicle. But it does have some really strong character and intriguing features to it. So it's really an interesting car. But let's talk about this one, because it is a replica, so it's going to vary somewhat from the original prototype. And fortunately, we worked with an Italian editorial company that Kirk provided us some books about Bertone. It's called The 90 Years Bertone. And we were very fortunate for them to give us permission to blow up some pages from that book to make some posters. So we do have some, and it's part Italian, part English. Obviously, they're an Italian publishing house, so of course it's going to be in English and Italian there. So it is in English. If you come in and try to read those posters, you just gotta move to another paragraph, okay, that looks more familiar to you. But we have a poster, and I mentioned that because of this, we have a poster of the Carrabbo. And so if you get to looking at that and the pictures of it, it does look similar but quite a bit different, the replica to the original. And some of that was based off of what they had available to them. So let's kind of go into that car and what we were, what they were able to accomplish with this replica, because it is an American-built replica of the car.
And this is the car here. You can see it behind me, but this is more what the original looked like. And many of you probably have seen this. It was a very popular Matchbox car. So a lot of people recognize this, the design. And there's a lot of cars that have been influenced by this design. I think, not just the Carrabbo, but many of the Bertone designs, even though they didn't go into production, they were influential ultimately on other car designs. And I think that's the beauty of this one is, this is one manufacturer's toy, but there are loads and loads of toys of this particular car, because it is such a, iconic, design that it really, gets people's attention. And the interior also is very interesting. Unfortunately, from this vantage point, you really can't see it, but, it's got a wood inlaid dash that's curved. And this, it's really kind of a one-of-a-kind design.
And one of the things that I find most intriguing about it is, again, it's that rear or mid-engine, design that they did with the original. The placement of the shifter is kind of up high, ready to go. It's in a really kind of a racing stance forward. positioning, so the shifting was easy. But I love that it has the toggle switches on the roof line between the gull wing doors. And, we'd have to jack the car up about 4 feet so most people could see that. But it's a really neat component to the car. It really just sets it apart from others. And this one, the American company, they got permission to do some replicas. They did it on a stretched Volkswagen Type 1 chassis, and because of that mounting placement, this one is powered by a turboed Volkswagen motor, which makes it a rear engine design just because of the mounting placement of the motor on the Volkswagen chassis. But the original, which if you ever make it over to Italy, to Turin, Italy, it is on display in the Bertone Museum there in Turin. And I hope to get there one day, because in the later years, Bertone was, think about, this car was built in the late 60s, and through the mid 60s, they started with the Lamborghini Miura, which was kind of an interesting, really progressive design at that point. And then they got even more crazy with the car designs, with like the Alfa Romeo Carrabbo, as well as the Lancia Stratos Zero
and NF. That one, I don't think I have one here, but that one's a pretty radical design as well. Actually, there may be one in this. I don't know if people would be able to see this, but some of these designs, this is going to be kind of hard to see, but there's really, really radical, way ahead of their time, cutting edge designs. Many of these cars, they look more like spaceships, frankly, than they do cars.
They really do.
Some of them look like they're straight out of a sci-fi movie. This one here is the Navajo, and it looks more like a spaceship, like some kind of spaceship out of a sci-fi movie than it does,
or like a car you'd see in a 70s Bond movie.
Exactly.
Or, something like that. It's really futuristic and kind of has this espionage spy quality to it, and so the cars are really fantastic in that sense. And we talk about, unfortunately, the Carrabbo not going into production, but you talk about how they went back to this design. And as a kid growing up in the 80s and having car posters on my wall, my first love was always the Mustang, the mid-60s Mustang, and kind of late 60s Mustang. But then the Lamborghini Countach was really popular, and they borrowed lines from this Alfa Romeo Carrabbo in the production aspect of the Lamborghini Countach. And, the idea of taking a car that you designed in the 60s and putting it into actual production models in the 70s and 80s is pretty astounding that you were able to keep those lines, that they still made sense.
And the Lamborghini Countach is a Bertone design.
Right.
Yeah. So, again, it's one of those ones that you'd recognize. And, one of the things you mentioned was a Mustang. So this is one that was designed, for Mustang. Really interesting. Has many of, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it, but has many of the Mustang features, but yet a little bit different in a very Bertone-esque sort of way. This one, as many of you car enthusiasts would know, didn't go into production, but it was designed by Bertone for Ford.
And they did work for just about everybody. We talk a lot about their Maserati, Lamborghini, Ferrari, Citroen, Alfa Romeo. We talk a lot about those connections, and they make sense, being a European company, being a well-known, very reputable car styling house that people wanted to work with. But they weren't just focusing their efforts there. They were doing prototype type designs. For the Mustang, for the Corvair, which
this is a brilliant design they did for Corvair, and this one actually was in the Bertone Museum in Italy as well, but where the windshield opens like this. So
darn that Ralph Nader anyway killed the Corvair. I think it's really fascinating to know that they worked and tried to work with American companies as well. Because
Cadillac,
Corvette. We have a poster of the Alfa Romeo, or the Bertone Romaro project, that kind of outlines their design work, that they tried to come up with a Corvette Bertone Corvette, which is pretty cool.
It's a really cool design. Yeah.
I know in my research I found a car back in the 60s, I believe. It was called the Dodge Vetter, that they had designed and for them and everything. So they really were a very, very progressive car. We talk about Cadillac, the Cadillac Villa, their idea of an executive car that they designed in the early 2000s. One of the things that stood out to me in it, the butterfly doors.
And you can find this on eBay, or not on eBay, but on YouTube. The video's on YouTube, and it's basically you push a button and the doors kind of come out and go off to the side in a butterfly sort of way. It's a very provocative design,
but they had like a 23-inch computer monitor in the dash.
Yeah.
And hello, in 2020, even 2015, we were seeing those in Teslas.
Yeah. Tesla's one of the only ones that has it on that scale.
So it's. I always joke with kids that come through the museum that quote unquote new car technology is not new car technology. It's something that's been improved upon from the past with flip out jump seats in touring cars of the 20s and 30s to stow and go seating in modern minivans, as an example. It's fascinating to see this ever-evolving world of automotive design, where now so much of our design is focused on the interior and the cab versus the actual presence of a vehicle. And I think that that's one thing that with your interest in car collecting, as much as any of our viewers out there on the internet, it's as much about the aesthetics and the viewing of that vehicle as it is the driving experience that just invokes so much happiness in us. And I always tell people, we all have a story with an automobile, whether it was good, bad, or otherwise. One that you wait until you're 40 or 50 to share with your mom and dad, or those types of things. We all have a story with an automobile, and they play such a major role in our lives. And we just really appreciate your time today, Kirk, to really kind of walk through these vehicles a little bit more in depth, to share your passion with the idea of collaboration. And again, as we started the video with, what a better time than now to talk about coming alongside one another and lifting
finding
each other
ways
up
to work together,
and helping each other get through a time of great problem solving. So
absolutely, and I think for anybody who has interest in what we're talking about in Bertone, there's a lot of great resources online. You Google it. Wikipedia has a lot of information on all the Bertone designs, car by car. And YouTube, you'll find some great great videos. There's one I've seen of some fellows getting together talking specifically about Bertone designs and their favorite designs and why. And as you learn more, you'll see that many of the things that they were doing were way ahead of their time. And one of the quotes that I love that I heard somebody once say about Bertone is they design cars as if they've never ever even seen a car before. And it's so there's just such radical stuff like one of the Lancia Stratos where you open it up and the steering column and everything goes up and you sit in it and you pull it down. It's like a spaceship. It's like some of these aren't even like cars. And so when you get into these, you can really there's a lot of depth and a lot of interesting things to discover.
And we're trying to do our part here at the Classic Car Collection, where again we're open for business as usual currently. Follow us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Keep up with our story here, and hopefully some more videos like this. But again, we really appreciate your time today, Kirk.
And one last plug. So if you guys are driving down the interstate across America, the car museum's not far from the interstate in Kearney, Nebraska. You need to stretch your legs, get a little air, and it is open right now. They're taking great precautions, but it's a very, very spacious area. So it is open, and you can come and check out the cars and learn a little bit about automobile history.
Absolutely. Come on down and take a cruise through history with us.
Thank you.